Welcome to the Biz Easy podcast, where small business is simplified for greater results. Brought to you by Resources and Development. Go to www.resources-development.com for help in taking your business to the next level. And now, help me welcome the host of the Biz Easy podcast, Steve McCrillis.
Welcome to the Biz Easy podcast, coming to you live from the small business capital of Middle Tennessee, your resource to help take your business to the next level. My name is Steve, your host, as we all learn how to stay better focused on the things that make you great. I'd like to introduce you to my partner and our resident guru of coaching, our lead business coach, Skip Williams.
Hey, Steve. Hey, before we get started, did you hear about the kidnapping at school today?
The what now?
The kidnapping at school today. Don't worry, it's fine. He woke up.
So, Skip, on that note, we have a very serious and rather lengthy vlog to discuss today. Nevertheless, I do believe that it is one that most small business owners would love to hear about. And the question is, what is my business worth?
That's right, Steve. That's right, Steve. We're going to talk about business valuation. And aside from the sale of your business, there's a few other reasons that you might, during your business life, that you might want to put a fair market value on your business. So let me start with a list of reasons why you may need a business valuation. When you're looking to sell your business, obviously, but when you're looking to merge or acquire another company, or when you're looking for business financing or investors, or number 4, when establishing partner ownership percentages, or adding shareholders, or perhaps for divorce proceedings, or for the dissolution of a business partnership. There's certain tax reasons as well. And of course, the biggest reason is for bragging rights, right? Just kidding. So there's a large handful of ways to perform a business valuation, although several are more about determining the value of publicly traded stock shares than they are for small businesses. So today, that's what we're going to do, is focus on just a few methods that we use for most small and medium-sized businesses for the purposes, one or more of the purposes that we previously stated. In all the methods, there's a certain amount of subjectivity. The methods themselves are pretty straightforward, but the subjectivity comes into play when determining that future potential of the business, right? Or what we call the blue sky portion of the business. This becomes the battlefield of the buyer and the seller, as value is ultimately determined by the beholder.
Yeah, Skip, let me, at this point, I would like to direct our listeners to our website where you can follow along on the very detailed blog that Skip has provided and we've discussed at www.resources-development.com. If you're driving, obviously you can't do that, but at least you have a resource to go through some of the points that Skip was going to talk about. Sorry about that, Skip. Let me give you back the floor.
Not at all. So the first method is what we call market valuation. So that method compares your business to similar businesses in your area that have sold recently, almost exactly how residential real estate is valued, but with a much smaller sample size. I can't really recommend this method because even though the size and the gross revenue of your business may match some other business, profitability rarely does. Some business owners can squeeze more juice out of their fruit than others, as you know. Also, locations are not equal, for a variety of other reasons. It's difficult to get that apples to apples comparison with any other business. In fact, I was recently involved in valuing a franchise operation where all the stores in the franchise were exactly the same footprint. They were all in similar shopping malls. And even in this case, their profitability was roughly this, the profitability on roughly the same amount of volume of business ranged from 10% of revenue to 38% of revenue. So if you priced them all the same, it's obvious which one you'd like to buy, right?
Sure.
That being said, because small business valuation method is relatively imprecise, your business's worth will ultimately be based on negotiation, especially if you're selling your business or seeking an investor. Nevertheless, this valuation method is a good preliminary approach to gain an understanding of what your business might be worth. But you'll probably likely want to bring another more calculated approach into to the negotiation table.
Skip, summarize for us, where do you think of the 9 different areas of why you need evaluation, where do you think this method is most commonly used?
Really, for, excuse me, really for just getting a rough estimate of what your business is worth. Maybe you're not ready to sell the business and anytime soon, but you'd like to know roughly what it's worth or what businesses like yours are going for. So it can be a method that gives you some idea of your business worth.
In the course of my travels, I've always asked every business owner, what is your business worth? That was a matter of course in the questioning that I gave them. And they were always stymied by that question. They didn't know. I had no idea what my business value was worth. But once I posed the question, they always said, well, can you determine what that is? And you and I obviously have always opened that opportunity for all of our clients in determining a valuation. But I think we're going to talk about the manner in which we do that as you go through your missive. Is that fair?
That's right. We're going to talk about 3 methods. And the second method is an asset-based valuation. And the asset-based method it's fairly straightforward. As the name suggests, you look at your balance sheet and you subtract your liabilities from your assets. The remainder is the value of the business. This method, however, fails to take into account the future potential. And there's therefore the method to use when the business is making little or no profit each year and for the purposes of liquidation. It can be a good valuation to do alongside the method that we're about to discuss, as sometimes a business is asset rich, even at a depreciated value. And if this value, and if the value is close to the number of the next method, it's easier to justify to the buyer because it's less subjective. Other times, this number might be considered the floor value of the business, or the least amount the business should be worth.
The asset-based valuation, correct me if I'm wrong, is very often used when you're looking for financing or financing partners. I mean, obviously, they have to have some degree of collateral against what the company can produce, but the profitability is an equal component of that equation. Is that a safe assumption?
Sure. If you're asset rich and cash poor, and you need to take a loan, then doing this method would help you justify what you're asking for from a bank or an investor. Absolutely right, Steve. I've often used them for businesses that were losing money each year because the least amount the business should be worth is the value of its assets, right?
That's true.
So the third method is capitalization of earnings. Now, this method is often called the cap value, and it uses a method of future potential as its main driver. In order to determine the cap value, one must first calculate the EBITDA, which is the annual earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So we want to back those numbers out. EBITDA is the net profit a new owner could expect to earn if they simply maintained what you're doing presently. It strips away that funny money from the equation, like depreciation and amortization, which are really not hard expenses. And because the tax rate and interest rates may be different than yours, it removes them as well. So once you've established the EBITDA, we then apply the cap rate multiplier. The multiplier is stated as a percentage. For example, a 25% cap rate is a 4x multiplier because 25 goes into 100 4 times. Therefore, the higher the percentage, the lower the multiplier. For example, a 50% cap rate would be a 2x multiplier. So don't worry too much about the fractional math here. I just want you to understand that there's a difference between the cap rate stated as a percentage and the multiplier stated with an X, I guess. And most negotiations, we really talk about the multiplier, not the cap rate.
Yeah.
So there's 2 main subjective areas when doing this calculation, or more precisely during the negotiation between the seller and the buyer. So there's always going to be some discrepancy between the buyer and the seller as to what that multiplier should be, but there can also be some consternation about the time period used in determining that EBITDA. So let's address. Go ahead.
This method truly has to be quantified from either the sellers or the buyers or the seller's point of view, or an amalgamation of the two, yes?
Right. We need to bring those 2 minds together. So let me just talk about it from the buyers and sellers' point of view here for a second.
Okay.
So when it comes to what the multiplier should be, if I'm a buyer, we have to remember that the buyer has this money to invest in your business. They want to know if they could get a better rate of return in a safer and relatively risk-free investment. This is what your business is compared against or competing with. If they could double their investment in another place in 5 years, which is not unusual, then why would they take the risk and the responsibility and the work to give you 5 times EBITDA, which equates to the same amount of earnings? So they will be measuring the risk and profit based on what you did with the business and not on the improvements that they think that they can bring to the table, right? They're paying you for what you did, not for what they're going to do in the future.
Okay.
If on the other hand, you have a business that has a lot of real estate, a hotel, motel, a farm, this automatically reduces much of the risk or the value or equity in those businesses, and then usually deserves a higher multipliers, as people are usually more patient about the return on their investment. Conversely, if you rent a rental location and have limited assets, then there's no fallback equity for those businesses, and they tend to have much smaller multipliers. Each industry has a range of multipliers that work financially for those types of businesses, and I won't get into the typical multipliers in this article. Suffice to say, the multipliers must work for the buyer. There can be mitigating factors, however, that make the buyer willing to pay more than the calculated value, such as a changing landscape of the area, a new shopping mall coming in, or something like that. The elimination of competition, maybe buying out you're their competitor, they're buying you out, or changing demand, or strategic reason, or even changing technology. These can sometimes add value. Go ahead.
So this method really, from the buyer's perspective, it's an investment decision. He's weighing what his return is against what his risk is. So that's really where the multiplier comes into from the buyer's perspective.
That's right. That's right. Can they get a better return on their investment elsewhere is what you're up against.
Sure.
And or can I get an investment that has less risk? That's
Sure.
part of the equation as well.
And now you go into the seller's point of view.
Yeah. So let me explain another part of it by looking at it from the seller's point of view. And the seller has put a lot of work in the business, building this business, and perhaps experienced a recent downswing or perhaps an upswing in both revenue and profit. He or she might want to get paid for recent growth by prorating the last 3 months into 12 months rather than using the last hard 12 months of the financial history. Or if he's experienced a downsizing, he might prefer to average the last 3 years of history together to determine what that EBITDA is. If you want to play this game, you best be prepared to convince the buyer as to why you think this is the fair way to value the business. For example, we were in the middle of COVID and we just came out the last 3 months, or we're in the middle of a recession, we just came out the last 3 months. At the end of the day, this business is not really worth what you say or even what you calculate. It's really worth what someone's willing to pay for it. And if that's not enough, a business owner must be prepared to continue to make them money over time rather than through the sale of their business. So for both, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Coming from the seller's perspective, it's really how passionate he is about his business and how much he is really integrally involved in the business, which is another factor that obviously is not in consideration here. If a buyer comes to a seller and wants to buy his business, the seller has to be prepared to have an operation that can be turned over to somebody else. But a mitigating factor here, which is probably not something that we even talked about, if the business is not operationally sound enough where that existing seller can walk away, if the risk escalates for the buyer in taking over, unless it's a turnkey type of business. So
that's right.
In this case, the seller is really the one that's carrying the burden, how passionate he is about what he thinks he can sell it for, and then try to convince somebody it's worth that much.
Yeah, like I said, there's a range of multipliers that we use for each industry, and the range, what number you use in that range is the subjective part, and it's based on things like, is the business highly dependent on the owner? Is the business growing, or is the industry growing or shrinking? Those types of questions we ask ourselves in determining what that multiplier should be within that range for that particular industry.
Right.
And Steve, I would say we all know about not getting emotional about purchases, right? Whether you're buying a new car or a new house, you want to be able to offer what you think is fair and walk away from the deal if it isn't. The same is true here for the seller. I'm sorry. The seller has to be dispassionate as well. I mean, realize there's a lot of emotion built into that business and a lot of hard work, and we've got to make sure that we make it fair for the seller. And if we don't want to make it fair for the seller, or we can't come to terms with the seller, we have got to be dispassionate enough to walk away from that sale and continue on doing business. And unfortunately, too many businesses are sold out of owner's burnout than owner's success. And those are when you're in that pain of burnout, it's hard to walk away from a sale.
Well, in addition to that, if you have a business owner, which I have encountered many, who have put their blood, sweat, and tears in this, took this thing from virtual nothing and grew it to its existing size, whatever magnitude that is. I mean, there is a lot of passion there, and there is a lot of angst to say, this is how much it's worth, and I'm not going to take a penny less. Now, there are many business owners who I talk to them about, what is your succession plan? What is your exit strategy? Because not everybody wants to die at their desk, although many of them do. That's not what their intent is. So having a valuation, this information is so valuable because as you plan your exit strategy succession, a business owner should know what, at least an approximation of what your business value is, not only for the event of a sale or some catastrophic change in the industry or whatever, but because this is how you set your goals and plans and expectations for the future of the business, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right. I mean, I was recently involved in a valuation / sale situation where we did the calculations for the business owner, and and that was one number, and then the buyer came in and offered something probably not quite, but almost half of what the owner valued his business at. And it was an easy calculation for the business owner to walk away from this because he realized that the amount of money that the buyer was offering him, he could earn that in the next 3 years or maybe even 18 months and then still own the asset at the end of that. So why should he sell? But if he had gotten his full price, he would have retired.
I would assume that this person that you're referring to was not in a position in his career where he was ready to retire and essentially do whatever else that he wanted to do, or was at an age where he was required to do that. He was young enough, and I say anybody between age 50 and 70 still is young enough to continue to want to do it if they have the wherewithal to do so, yes?
In this case, he was ready to retire. However, he had another family member that was quite a bit younger than him in the business as well. So he wasn't worried about the business continuing for another 3 or 4 or 5 years before they sold it.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So we have had the good pleasure of dealing with many companies. In fact, we talk to them about feasibility analysis for their companies when they're beginning a startup, when they want to at least plan where they're going to go. So we always talk to them about what the value will be over a period of time, what is your end goal, and so on and so forth. So I think that valuations are critical for any business owner to know where you are, know where it can go to, and ultimately have that information at your disposal. Because as industries change, as these COVID type of things come up, you may find yourself in a position where you want to sell. You may find yourself in a position where it may be lucrative to sell. So I think having an evaluation is a very important part. And I don't think it's price prohibitive, much like having a will or trust or anything. It's not price prohibitive to have. It's just good sense to have that information.
And having that third party do the calculations gives you more credibility at the negotiation table as well.
I think that's the very important added element, because if you just value it yourself, this is what I figured out. But when it's an accredited or it's a verified through a third party valuation, I think it brings more credibility to the table. That's just my opinion.
And that's why when I do them, I do method two and 3. I take and look at the asset value as well as the cap value, and that way we see that just the assets are worth this, and I'm asking that, and if seller comes in and offers something lower than that, lower than the asset value, then he's not even serious. He or she's not even serious at all. And you walk away from the table without even trying to negotiate.
Yeah. Great information, a lot of valuable information here. Going through each one of these methods of valuations, I think everybody should at least browse through. And again, I invite you to join us at www.resources-development.com. Read through it yourself. Any questions, obviously, you can always send them through. We'll be happy to answer what other questions you have. And obviously, we help you go through a valuation of your own business. So with that, I think we've lapsed all of our time.
If I could just add, if I could just add one more thing, and that is that you mentioned exit strategy. It's good to know what your business is worth at least 3 to 5 years before you're ready to sell it, so you can do some planning. There's, as you can see, if EBITDA affects the value of it so much, there's some things that we can do in those last few years to enhance the EBITDA of the business and make it that much more valuable. Because remember, that's what we're multiplying. If we can save 25 cents and add it to the bottom line, we could be adding $1, $2, maybe even $3 worth of value to the sale of the business.
I think that's a perfectly appropriate timeline, 3 to 5 years. Keep that in mind.
Right. Exactly.
Awesome. With that, thanks for listening. And that is off.
That is a wrap.